if you turn on the television on a Sunday afternoon in the fall, it kind of feels like every other commercial break or commentator discussion hones in on the exact same thing.
Right, concussions in sports.
Yeah, concussions. I mean, we get the slow motion replays. We see those blue medical tents on the sidelines. And, we hear the analysts constantly debating the protocols.
Yeah, it's treated like this massive, highly visible crisis.
Which, I mean, it is. It definitely is. But what if I told you that while we're all sort of staring at the bright stadium lights, there is a much larger, completely invisible crisis happening right now behind concrete walls and steel doors?
Right, the justice system.
Exactly. Today, we are taking a deep dive into the justice system and really the hidden neurological reality of the people inside of it.
And it is a reality that deeply challenges our basic assumptions about behavior and accountability.
For sure. So the mission for today's deep dive is to untangle this incredibly complex web of traumatic brain injury, or TBI, and human behavior. We want to move way beyond that simplistic, almost Hollywood narrative that, brain damage equals bad behavior.
Right, the whole broken brain trope.
Yeah, and hopefully we can discover the hidden neurological armor that might actually protect us. But before we get to how the brain defends itself, we really have to understand the sheer scale of the threat. The literature frequently calls this a silent epidemic, right?
Yeah, silent epidemic captures it perfectly. I mean, the CDC estimates that roughly 1.4 million people sustain a traumatic brain injury each year.
Wait, 1.4 million every single year?
Every single year in the United States alone. And the reason it remains silent is that, well, the vast majority of these injuries do not leave a visible physical scar.
Right.
In fact, in the general population, about 75% of these injuries are classified as mild TBIs.
Okay, let me push back on that phrasing for a second, because terminology is everything here.
Sure.
When I hear that 75% of these injuries are labeled mild, like something akin to a standard sports concussion where you might, get your bell rung or see stars for a minute, it makes me wonder if we are overreacting.
How do you mean?
Well, using a word like epidemic sounds incredibly severe if, most people just have a headache, take some ibuprofen, and go back to work.
Right, and that is probably the most common misconception surrounding brain injuries, the word mild.
It's just a label.
It is strictly an acute medical classification used at the exact time of the injury. It is absolutely not a measure of the life impact that injury might have down the road.
Ah, okay. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, to be medically classified as a mild TBI, an individual typically has a score of 13 to 15 on the Glasgow Coma Scale, which is just it's a quick test of eye, verbal, and motor responses by first responders.
So it's basically checking if you can, open your eyes, answer basic questions, and maybe squeeze a hand.
Precisely. It's very basic. And alongside that, they might have post-traumatic amnesia.
Which is memory loss of the event itself, right?
Right, exactly. Memory loss of the event lasting less than 24 hours. And if they lose consciousness at all, it lasts for 30 minutes or less.
Got it.
If you meet those criteria, the medical chart just says mild.
So it's really just a snapshot of the immediate trauma. It's not a forecast for their cognitive future at all.
And that is exactly where the danger lies. While symptoms for a mild TBI usually resolve within 3 months for most people, a significant percentage of individuals develop post-concussive syndrome.
Which is when the symptoms just don't go away.
Right. That involves persistent, long-term cognitive and emotional impairments. And even more crucial to understand is the mechanism of recurrent injuries.
Like getting multiple concussions over time.
Yes. Repeated so-called mild injuries have a cumulative effect. They literally pile up, creating severe, cascading long-term damage to the brain's internal networks.
Wow. Which brings us to the incarcerated population, where the statistics, frankly, they blew my mind.
They are staggering.
Yeah. Because if 1.4 million people in the general population are getting TBIs, the rates behind bars seem to exist on another planet entirely. I was reading that a meta-analysis of over 4,800 offenders estimated a TBI prevalence rate of over 60%.
Over 60%, yes.
And it scales even higher depending on the specific population,
Yeah.
right? Other smaller studies have found rates up to 88%. And there was one study looking at death row inmates.
Oh, that study. Yeah, that study found a 100% prevalence rate of TBI.
Wait, I need to pause on that for a second. 100%. Every single person sitting on death row in that specific study had a history of traumatic brain injury.
Every single one, yes. We are looking at a population that has experienced massive amounts of head trauma, often repeatedly, and crucially, almost always without any follow-up medical care.
So they're just walking around with unhealed brain damage.
Exactly. We have a massive number of people sitting in federal and state prisons whose brains have been structurally altered.
Okay, so to understand why that structural alteration changes a person's life trajectory, we really have to look at what physical trauma actually does to the command center of the brain.
Yeah.
Because the brain isn't just, a uniform blob.
Right, it has geography.
Yeah, I have geography. And because of the way our skulls are built, the frontal lobes happen to sit in a really dangerous neighborhood.
They really do.
From what I was reading, the inside of the human skull isn't like a perfectly smooth helmet.
Far from it. The inside of the skull, particularly at the base where the frontal lobes rest, is lined with sharp, bony protrusions and rigid ridges.
Like a rocky coastline.
That's a great way to picture it. Think of a rocky coastline. When a person experiences a traumatic brain injury, say from a car crash, a bad fall, or a violent assault, the soft tissue of the brain literally sloshes back and forth inside the skull.
Ugh, just violently scraping against it.
Yes. Because of their physical location, the frontal lobes are highly susceptible to being bruised and scraped against those bony ridges.
And the frontal lobes happen to be the home of our executive functioning.
Yes, the CEO of the brain.
Okay.
And to understand how vital executive functioning, or EF, is, it really helps to break down the mechanics of it. The neuropsychologist Muriel Lezak developed this widely used framework.
Right. She identified 4 key components that have to work in perfect sequence. Let's ground this in reality for a second.
Okay.
Imagine an inmate is sitting in the prison cafeteria eating lunch, and another inmate accidentally bumps into them and spills a tray of hot food right on their lap.
Oh, that's a highly volatile scenario.
Yeah. What does that sequence look like if their executive functioning is perfectly healthy?
Okay, great scenario. So the very first component of EF is volition.
Volition.
Right. That is your capacity for intentional behavior and motivation. The hot food spills. Volition is that internal spark that says, I need to respond to this situation. I am angry and I need to act.
Okay, so the drive is there, the engine is on, what's next?
The second step is planning. This is where your brain rapidly weighs options and controls your impulses.
Like figuring out what to actually do about the spilled food.
Exactly. Do I stand up and yell? Do I throw a punch? Do I just grab some napkins and diffuse the situation? A healthy frontal lobe models out the consequences of those options in milliseconds.
Incredible. And then the third step, according to Lizak's framework, is purpose of action.
Right. Purpose of action is the actual initiation of the behavior you chose during the planning phase.
So actually doing it.
Yes. It is the ability to start a sequence of actions, maintain it, and keep it on track. So you stand up and you ask for the napkins.
And then the final component is effective performance.
Which is your overarching self-regulation. As you are asking for the napkins, you're constantly reading the room. Is the other guy getting aggressive? Did a guard just walk in?
Right, taking in new information.
Exactly. Effective performance is the feedback loop that allows you to hit the brakes and adjust your behavior in real time based on the changing environment.
So if we look at that 4-step sequence, executive functioning isn't just one single skill like having a good memory.
No, not at all.
It is really the conductor of a highly complex orchestra.
That's it.
And if the conductor is disoriented because the frontal lobe got bruised against those bony ridges in the skull, it doesn't matter how well the individual musicians can play their instruments.
Right. It doesn't matter if your language skills or math skills are intact.
Because the violins come in at the wrong time, the brass plays way too loud, and the whole symphony just collapses into chaos.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. And it ties directly into Luria's theory of systemic brain functioning. Because EF doesn't happen in an isolated vacuum.
Right.
The frontal lobe has reciprocal two-way relationships with almost every other region of the brain. The conductor is talking to every section of the orchestra simultaneously.
So when the frontal lobe is physically damaged, it disrupts that entire reciprocal network.
Exactly. Which leads to the well-documented after effects of frontal lobe damage: severe impulsivity, aggression, depression, paranoia, and just a total inability to integrate socially.
Because you might have the volition, you want to do
Yeah.
something, but your planning phase is completely broken, so you just skip straight to throwing the punch.
It skipped the brakes entirely.
Wow. But this is where the source material gets really fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Because if the frontal lobe is so physically vulnerable, and this conductor is so critical to our behavior, how do we explain the variation?
The differences in outcomes.
Yeah. Like, why do 2 people with the exact same type of head injury end up with totally different life outcomes? One person bounces back in a few months, goes back to work, and the other struggles to hold down a job or stay out of prison for the rest of their life.
That is the ultimate mystery in neuropsychology. And solving it brings us to a concept known as cognitive reserve theory.
Right, originally developed by researchers Satz and Stern.
Yes. To understand the mechanism, we really have to distinguish between two distinct types of reserve. There is brain reserve, and there is cognitive reserve.
Okay, let me make sure I'm getting this right. Brain reserve is passive. It is strictly about the physical hardware, right?
Correct. The actual volume of the brain, the size of the skull, the raw neuronal count.
Right, the stuff you're basically just born with. But cognitive reserve, on the other hand, is active.
Very active.
It is about how the brain copes with damage by utilizing highly efficient neural networks or by actively developing compensatory workarounds to bypass the damaged areas.
Yes, exactly. You can think of cognitive reserve like a city's power grid.
Oh, I like that.
If a massive storm, which represents a brain injury in this case, knocks out a major electrical substation in the city, what happens?
Well, if it's a weak grid, half the city goes dark. You get rolling blackouts.
Exactly. But if it is a highly robust advanced power grid, the system automatically and instantly reroutes the electricity through a complex network of auxiliary lines.
So the substation is still destroyed.
The physical damage is there, yes. But the power keeps flowing. The people in the city might not even see the lights flicker. That robust grid is your cognitive reserve.
That is wild. So how do you actually build a robust grid? I mean, is this just genetic luck with your baseline IQ? Or can you actively construct these auxiliary lines yourself throughout your life?
You can absolutely build it. Cognitive reserve is deeply influenced by pre-morbid general intelligence, meaning your IQ before the injury, but it is heavily fortified by your educational attainment and the complexity of your occupational level.
So just going to school and having a challenging job physically changes your brain's resilience.
Yes, the literal act of learning, of challenging your brain, builds those efficient auxiliary networks.
That's amazing. But on the flip side, I imagine something like chronic substance abuse act like a wrecking ball to that infrastructure.
A total wrecking ball, yes. This reserve is actively drained by neurological deficits. A history of chronic substance abuse, prior brain injuries, or severe untreated psychiatric problems will systematically dismantle that grid.
So education and cognitive engagement act as a literal protective shield.
They really do. The higher the reserve, the more physical damage the brain can sustain before showing any clinical functional deficits.
And that completely explains the mystery of the different recovery timelines. The hardware might be equally damaged in two different people, but one of them has a software system that can, patch the glitch.
Exactly. Which brings us from theory into practice. How does this concept hold up in the real world, particularly in a high-stress, highly marginalized environment like a federal prison?
Right, because theory is nice, but data is better.
Exactly. And this is where Abigail Burnett's research provides some incredible data. She conducted a rigorous study of 224 federal inmates to test these exact hypotheses.
And she put them through a very comprehensive battery of tests, didn't she?
She did. To assess their injury history, she used the Traumatic Brain Injury Questionnaire. And to test their executive functioning, to basically see how well the conductor was managing the orchestra, she used several tests.
Like Trails B, which measures attention and mental flexibility.
Right. And a very famous one called the Wisconsin Card Sorting Test.
Oh, the Wisconsin Card Sorting Test. For you listening, if you've never encountered this test, picture sitting at a desk with a highly frustrating puzzle.
It is notoriously frustrating.
You are given cards with different shapes, colors, and numbers of symbols. You are told to sort them into piles, but the examiner refuses to tell you the rules.
They just sit there.
Right, they just sit there. You just have to place a card, and the examiner says either right or wrong. So through trial and error, you eventually figure out, okay, I need to sort them by color.
Yeah.
But the moment you figure out that unspoken rule, the examiner silently changes the rule to shape, and you start getting everything wrong again.
It's maddening.
It really is. You have to recognize that the environment changed and adapt your strategy on the fly. It tests exactly how well you can adjust to a shifting reality.
Exactly. It's the gold standard for testing cognitive flexibility. And the results from this battery of tests yielded some major surprises that completely challenge our standard assumptions.
Okay, let's get into the surprises.
So the first finding. Overall, despite the incredibly high rates of traumatic brain injuries in this inmate sample, they tested in the average range for most executive functioning and cognitive domains.
Wait, average range? despite the TBIs.
Yes. As a group, they completely defied the stereotype of the cognitively impaired inmate.
Wow. Which flows right into the second finding, and this is where I really need you to help me untangle things. So the study initially hypothesized that a more severe TBI would naturally equal greater deficits in executive functioning.
Which seems logical.
Yeah, but the data completely rejected that. A severe traumatic brain injury did not guarantee a worse performance on these tests.
Right. Hypothesis 1 failed.
So are you saying the physical damage doesn't actually matter? Because we just spent 10 minutes talking about the frontal lobes violently scraping against the bony ridges of the skull.
I know, it sounds totally counterintuitive. The physical injury absolutely matters. What the data reveals, however, is that cognitive reserve matters more. This was the third major finding, and it succeeded in proving his hypothesis. Lower cognitive reserve equaled greater executive functioning deficits.
Okay, so the reserve is doing the heavy lifting.
Exactly. Of all the variables tested, a person's IQ was the strongest, most consistent predictor of how well they did on the executive functioning tests. It uniquely predicted the variance in the scores, largely independent of how severe their actual brain injury was.
So the reserve literally masked the physical damage.
Yeah.
If an inmate had a higher IQ or a stronger educational background, their brain found a workaround for the trauma caused by the TBI. Their brain routed the power through the auxiliary lines so they could still adapt and pass the card sorting tests.
That is the power of the cognitive grid at work. But, this brings us to the final and perhaps most profound section of our deep dive.
Behavior.
Yes. We have to look at behavior and the bigger picture. If cognitive reserve determines how well your executive functioning survives a brain injury, does your executive functioning dictate how you behave in your daily life?
Logically, you would assume yes. I mean, if the conductor of the orchestra is healthy and passing all their tests, the symphony should sound great. If the conductor is impaired, the musicians go rogue and break the rules.
That is the standard societal assumption. But the fourth finding completely upended this.
It's rise number 4.
Right. The study expected that worse executive functioning test scores would naturally lead to more behavioral infractions and more psychological service visits during the first 2 years of the inmate's incarceration.
Makes sense.
But they found absolutely zero correlation between executive functioning test scores and institutional behavior.
Wait, zero correlation.
None.
Walk me through the mechanism of that.
Oh.
Why would someone be able to sit in a room, perfectly adapt to the changing rules of a frustrating card sorting test, but then walk out into the cell block, make a terrible decision, and get written up for a violent infraction?
It comes down to a concept called ecological validity.
Ecological validity, what's that?
It's the measure of how well a controlled test in a clinical setting actually translates to the chaotic real world.
Oh, okay.
Think about the environment of the Wisconsin card sorting test. You are in a quiet, air-conditioned room. It is one-on-one. There is no physical threat.
Right.
Your frontal lobe has the peace and quiet it needs to process information and solve the puzzle.
Contrast that with a prison yard.
Exactly. A prison yard is loud, unpredictable, and highly threatening. It is an environment built on survival stakes.
A completely different ecosystem.
Yes. And in that real-world scenario, especially for someone with a history of trauma, the brain's threat detection center, the amygdala, can completely override the prefrontal cortex.
Ah. So the quiet clinical test artificially props up executive functioning by removing all the stressors that typically cause it to collapse in the real world.
Precisely. Testing ability and real-world behavior are fundamentally different things. The adrenaline and survival instinct effectively hijack the frontal lobe before it even has a chance to execute that 4-step plan we talked about earlier.
The volition, planning, purpose of action sequence, it just gets short-circuited.
It gets completely bypassed, which is why this study is so important. It absolutely dismantles the simplistic narrative that a dent in the frontal lobe automatically makes people violent rule breakers. Human behavior is incredibly complex and, well, heterogeneous.
It's so layered.
Yeah.
So when we look at the justice system as a whole, what is the takeaway here? Because we know the injuries are there, the rates are sky high, but we also know the direct line between injury and behavior is kind of a myth.
The takeaway is that we have to stop looking for simple biological excuses for human behavior.
Right.
We cannot simply put someone in an MRI machine, see structural damage, and confidently predict their life choices or their likelihood to commit a crime.
You have to zoom out.
Exactly. We have to look at the entire human ecosystem. What is their educational background? What is their history of past psychological trauma? What is their relationship with substance use? What kind of socioeconomic environment are they returning to?
Because all of those factors interact with their brain architecture.
Yes, they do. This study strongly recommends that correctional institutions implement highly individualized screening and treatment programs rather than making sweeping assumptions based solely on a person's medical chart.
It's treating the whole human being, not just the isolated diagnosis.
Exactly.
Wow. Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you listening with a final thought to mull over, one that really stems from the core of this research.
That's a powerful thought.
It really is.
Yeah.
If educational attainment literally builds up a person's cognitive reserve, if the act of learning physically constructs those auxiliary power lines in the brain to act as an invisible shield against physical trauma, shouldn't we start viewing access to education through a totally different lens?
Absolutely.
Like not just as an economic ladder or a social issue, but as a critical form of preventative healthcare. We are talking about providing literal neurological armor for our most vulnerable populations.
It completely reframes how we value cognitive engagement, building a stronger grid before the storm even hits.
It's a fascinating implication of the data. So the next time you hear someone talking about a concussion under those bright stadium lights, take a moment to think about the invisible injuries happening in the shadows and the incredible complex ways our brains try to protect us.
Well said.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the simple narratives in the world around you, and we will catch you next time.